All right, everybody, back here on the Quinn Spin. As I just mentioned a moment ago before you heard our wonderful ad for Anchor, I have Madame Daley joining us here on the show, who is a multifaceted, multi-talented artist, musician, songwriter, performer based in New York City. I'm very excited for this because I think this is just really an interesting project that you have and how you incorporate so many different things, so many different artistic mediums and interests into your art. So first of all, Madam, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is actually my first podcast ever.
Really?
Yeah, I've never been on a podcast. I'm a big podcast listener, but I've never been a guest. So thank you for having me.
Well, I'm glad we could do that for you. I'm sure you'll be a natural. I'm very excited for this as well. I'm even more excited now. So now that I know that, hope you're ready for some hardball questions. No,
oh my gosh.
Just kidding. We try to keep it fairly light here at the Quinn Spin, but I will ask the three standard questions that we start every show with. Those being, and feel free to answer these however you want. Who are you? What are your passions? And why on earth would you want to come on the Quinn Spin?
Yeah. Okay. So I am Madame Daley. I think we touched on that already. My passions. I mean, how many of your guests just say music? Right. Obviously music. I think that something I am passionate about, and we'll probably touch on it a bunch in this interview, is sort of being yourself and allowing yourself, giving yourself permission to kind of be your true full self without judgment, kind of seeping in. And that's something that over time I've learned, and everybody's a work in progress. So I'm still working on it, but it's definitely quintessential to who Madame Daley is. And I wanted to come on the Quinn Spin because I've never been on a podcast before, and I'm excited.
Well, excited to have you again. Glad we could be your first podcast opportunity. And yeah, that definitely resonates right away. The idea of showing up as your full authentic self, that's something that we try to preach here on the show. I mean, if you're playing the Quinn Spin drinking game out there, you could probably take a drink for that, because that's one of those things we touch on, is true authenticity, true vulnerability through art. And, of course, you pull in so much of yourself into this Madame Daley project and all you do, and we'll certainly have a chance to touch on that. Let's start then from the beginning. So you've had a chance to work in a bunch of different artistic mediums. You've had a chance to, of course, be in a few different locations throughout the course of your life. And I'm curious to know how that history creating, how some of your formative experiences and influences have led you to this life of boundless creativity.
Yeah, I tend to say that I'm a bit all over the place. The nicer way to say that is jack of all trades, master of none. But yeah, so my family's from Brooklyn, New York originally, but for the most part, I grew up in Tampa, Florida. And growing up in Tampa, I actually did Irish dance from 5 years old until about 15. So, that was a big part of my development, as well as doing performing arts, musical theater, which, shocker, look at me, I did theater. And, so that time period in my life was so formative for, my performance style, because I was always kind of like this shy kid, and that was like the outlet for it. And that's kind of where that idea of like stepping into becoming a different person and using that creative space to, like we already said, letting yourself be yourself in like sort of this weird safe space that theater gives you. And yeah, so from there, I always had interest, like I said, theater, acting, I did dance. I also was into photography, videography. Speaking of theater, I actually was like a video director for one of my high school musicals. We did like Carrie the musical, and we used these video screens to show like the telekinesis. And so I've just kind of been, like I said, all over the map. In college, I studied music business, but I was also big into my college newspaper. I was a photographer for them. And then coming out of college, I've done a bunch of social media work. I'm currently a marketing manager for some bars and restaurants around the city. So, I've always kind of said, like, I'm happy in anything where I get to be creative. Obviously music is my biggest passion out of that, but that's kind of always what I say in a job interview is like, what draws you to this? If you have such a varied background. And that's kind of always what I say is that if I'm creative, then I'm happy.
Right. I find that creativity, like there are so many common threads no matter the medium too. Like
Yeah,
so many things carry over. It's a mindset. It's a spirit of creation. It's a spirit of innovation. It's a spirit of expression. Right. So it's easy in a sense to, you know, jump between mediums and have one inform the other, have that theater background inform music, have that visual background inform a lot of what you put forth visually, in your art in these different platforms, and of course you living and having such a family history in New York City, which I mean is a creative hub, almost second to none in so many ways, where there's so many opportunities, there's so many different ways of life and people and perspectives to engage with. I'm sure that only feeds your creativity more.
definitely.
So was it always going to be New York? Because you grew up in Tampa, then you went to college out in Colorado, and then
Yeah.
you ended up making the move in 2019, right before the pandemic came down on us, to New York City. So what made that so appealing a choice? And what did your family history play a role in that? Or was that something that you just kind of came back around to on your own?
Totally. Yeah. So I think living in New York even though it's funny, like I lived there for the first 3 or 4 years of my life, moving to New York, living there had always kind of been a dream since I was really young. Probably part of that is just Broadway, being there. And then, I've always been interested in fashion, and like one of my favorite shows growing up was Project Runway. And so, like you said, that creative hub, it just kind of draws you there. And yeah, I mean, my family history definitely plays a role in it. I spent so much time here growing up. Every summer I'd be up here. I interned here every summer of college. And you want to move somewhere where you're close to family. And I have tons of cousins up here in Brooklyn, in Long Island, upstate. We got Daleys all over the board, the board up here.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, again, it's just such a great, the melting pot aspect of it, the different
Mhm.
perspectives that come in, the different experiences you get to have in a place like New York City, and a large, global hub like that. Certainly, again, create a unique experience that not everybody gets to have, throughout the country, throughout the world. However, it also, was a challenging time to be there over the past couple of years with the COVID pandemic, especially as a creative person. I'm curious to know your experience with that as well. As far as maintaining your creativity, finding ways to still create despite the pandemic, and navigating the challenges that so many in the music industry face, so many, just across the board, in performing arts and the creative fields faced. How did you navigate 2020 and even 2021 up until now, being in New York, where the pandemic was really, at a fever pitch, before and even after, most other places in the country?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I actually ended up, once my lease was done, I ended up going back to Tampa for a little bit.
Mhm.
I eventually got laid off, like so many people.
Yeah.
So there was about a 10-month span there where I was essentially stuck in Florida. Obviously, it was nice to be with family and all that stuff. But, I didn't have a car, I didn't have a job, like I didn't really have anything to do. So I ended up spending a lot of that time running, which
Mhm.
I love to do, um, and had plenty of time to do. And then, songwriting and, just, I don't know, getting inspiration from other mediums, reading, like podcasts. Obviously, a lot of people were streaming. But it was definitely a very, very, very tough time for me personally. And what's funny though is that 10 months, like when I finally got back to New York, so May of 2021, I didn't have a job yet, and I was just like, screw it, I'm gonna move back, whatever.
Mhm.
And I was like, I'll get a job at Starbucks if I need, it's fine. So I found this great studio that I'm in right now, and got a crazy amazing COVID deal on it. And about 2 days later, I got a job at a social media company. And I ended up gigging like as much as possible. So during the summer of 2021, that's when indoor dining was just allowed again in New York. And I ended up having about 3 months straight where I had 3 gigs a week on top of my full-time job, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And I honestly do not know how I did that, but I think I just had so much pent up energy from the pandemic. And, I had gigged before, but yeah, there was just like this fire. And what kind of fed it even more is the fact that like anytime, because these gigs I'm talking about were like cover bar gigs, which is something I still do and I really enjoy. So people would come in to the bar not knowing that there's going to be music, and then they'd see me and their face would light up and they're like, oh my God, live music. Like I miss this so much.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was just such a it was such a heartwarming and like almost magical time of being in the city and feeling like you're a part of the resurgence of it in a way.
Yeah,
Mhm.
we experienced something similar here in Nashville. I remember, it was May of 21 when things started to fully open back up. I think the restrictions here were a little looser because we're in the South, but
Yeah, I was in Florida. I know.
yeah, you were in
I'm
Florida, which,
familiar.
yeah, I mean, the land that law forgot in a lot of ways down there through the pandemic, but like, yeah, we had like 25% capacity, 50%. It would kind of turn on and off here in Nashville and Davidson County. But like that first few weeks after things fully opened up, nobody was staying inside. Everybody had this pent up energy. Everybody had spent enough time with themselves and going inward, and they just wanted to get out and experience things. And we started putting on shows, through the Underground Music Collective platform. And we had some of our best attended shows those first few weeks after, because people just wanted to get out and hear live music. They didn't even care if they knew the bands. They didn't care what it was. They wanted to get out there,
Exactly.
and it was just this, it felt good to really be part of that resurgence. And now I find like, now that live music's been back and, there aren't so many people as hesitant to go out, it's a lot tougher to book, number one, because everyone who wasn't booking yet in 2021 is back out on the landscape. But also people are kind of used to going out again. So it's a harder sell to get them to come to your show, in a lot
Yeah.
of ways. But yeah, those first couple months really, when things really fully open, were magic, as long as COVID didn't come back in and cancel your show, which, is
Yeah.
still, I guess, a looming possibility that we deal with. I mean, how have you found it evolving in New York, comparing last year to now, as far as like, how has that progressed up that way?
Yeah, I mean, so even talking about the gigs, right? Like you look back at some of the videos that I have of performing, and there's like the little plastic divider in front of me and things like that.
Mhm.
And the people in the audience are wearing masks and all that kind of stuff. And it just slowly fades and fades and fades. People on the subway here are still wearing masks most of the time. There's definitely like a varying degree to it, but I would say it's open. The
Yeah.
city's open, the world is open. We're relatively back to normal. Hopefully unscathed. A lot of us not, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's the thing is, varying degrees and varying levels of comfort. I think that's just going to be the thing, as we continue to live with it, navigate it, learn the lessons from it, hopefully, but by this point, everybody's had a chance to decide what they're going to do, vaccinated or not, like at this point, everyone's kind of on their own. Right. So things open up and, you would hope people make the responsible decisions, but not everyone does. But
Yeah.
either way, here we are and things are back fully up and running, and it's giving you a chance to create some really cool live experiences, which we're going to get into in a moment. But first, I want to touch on the Madame Daley project itself. This is not just a musical project, because it pulls in all these influences. It pulls in your love of fashion, theater, your appreciation for the drag community. There's this undercurrent of women's empowerment that runs through the whole thing, and you have this dynamic, multifaceted experience, that you've created for people, not just in the EP, which you're about to release, but also by presenting the live show in a number of different ways. You have one version that is covers, from any area. You have one version that's the original music, and then a stripped down acoustic version. So I want to give you a chance to kind of dive into each experience and tell us what each one brings to the table and brings to the audience.
Yeah, so we do have three different shows. I kind of gave them cutesy little names. So the first is like a classic show. Obviously, it plays on the classic EP title, but it's a straight up original music show. And then what we have, what we like to call the jukebox circus show. So it's sort of a play on the rock and roll circus from the Rolling Stones, how they brought all those bands together. And that's kind of what we try to do with this cover band show is like you said, any artist, any genre, any era. I say it so much over and over again. I'm sure the people are sick of hearing it, but I mean it. We do anywhere from disco to rap to grunge. There's an Eminem mashup cover in our set. We do I Will Survive, just like you don't know what you're gonna get. And that's kind of how I want it to feel. I want it to feel exciting and just like, okay, what's the next song? What's the next song?
Yeah. Do you get any crazy requests from people, or are people eligible to give requests during the jukebox circus?
Yeah, so not during the jukebox circus because it is a full band show. Me and my girls from the Star Child band have talked about it before of like maybe one day we'll get to that spot. But the ones where people can make any requests are those stripped down acoustic shows. I'm not wearing the whole getup. It's just me. Sometimes my drummer Lexi will join me on cajon. But that's where you can request anything. And that's kind of where my original performing came from, is those cover gig shows at bars, people request. And I just kind of have an iPad. I pull up, the tabs and the chords and kind of go from there. But to answer your question, the craziest cover I've ever been asked for is probably Skrillex.
Skrillex?
Yes.
How acoustic?
Yes. I don't know if that was a joke, but he seemed very genuine about it.
So like, how did it go?
I mean, unfortunately, I have to have those conversations sometimes where I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know it, or I can't do it. I hate it. Like, even if it's like, there's sometimes where it's like a song that I know of, but I don't know well enough to just like pull it up on the fly. And I feel so bad, but it's the nature of it. Most of them I can do.
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around how you would cover Skrillex on acoustic guitar and cajon. I'm sure there's a way, but I'm sure it would take like a lot of like creative digging. Like you'd have to sit with that for a while.
Yeah. I'm sure we could figure something out, but not in the moment. It was not going to happen, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really cool how you're able to bring these different experiences to people and really, within live performance, show these different sides of you as a performer, these different sides of what you bring to the table. And I feel like you also bring a lot of, multifaceted interest and influence to the table with the EP Classic, which as of episode premiere date is out now. It was released on August 5th. And I want to dig into the creative process a little bit, because what I really appreciate about the record and the songs here is like, there's definitely this rock and roll undercurrent, but it's presented in all these different shades. Like you have, one song you have a clear, like almost Elton John, flair to it. And then, I heard a little bit of grunge on another track, like there's all this different, all these different rock and roll influences that really, I think, pay homage to the history of the genre. And so I'm curious to dig into your creative process, the songwriting, who you worked with, how this all came together to create these 5 songs that say so much, in just 5 tracks.
Well, I really appreciate you picked up on those, little nods to different genres. Clearly, that's something that I am passionate about. I'm just a music fan in general. Like, yes, when people ask me what type of music, I just say glam rock. It feels like it encompasses it the best way. But, I just a music fan, music listener, and I pull from so many different areas of music. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of why I decided to name the EP Classic, right? Because it's about classic rock or classic whatever genre you're talking about. And that song in particular, sort of plays on that, uses different iconic pop culture elements or even song titles, and creates a love song. And it's funny because I used to say, oh, that's a love song, I didn't write it about anybody in particular. And then my guitarist Susie, one rehearsal, was like, you wrote it about your love of music, duh. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. So yeah, I mean, and like another big thing that I've always appreciated in music, but really in any avenue, is sort of this idea of like generational passing down of the torch,
Mhm.
you know? And so there, nothing comes out of a vacuum. Everybody's influenced by something. And those like pop culture moments, those iconic music, uh, you know, moments of history, like they matter. They really do. They shape how we think, how we talk, and I don't know. I just kind of wanted to touch on that as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said for the timeless nature of a lot of the music that does get passed down and reimagined later on. Like one recent pop culture example I think of is Silk Sonic, Bruno
Hmm.
Mars and Anderson .Paak. Like that
Exactly.
is such a vintage, like soul, Motown, R&B sound, but it's made modern thematically, right?
Yes.
And it's just this cross section. Bootsy Collins is like the godfather of the project. He's the narrator, everything, and like it borrows so much from like these eras of soul and Motown and R&B, these timeless sounds that'll never get old and never go away. But it's brought to light here. That was released in 2021, and there is something to be said for that. Like good music never dies, right? Like
Exactly.
good music gets passed down through the generations. It withstands any trend. It withstands, any passing fad. It doesn't just come and go. Like there are songs that are 50, 60 years old that still endure today. And by capturing that in a modern sense, an artist like you is able to give those sounds, those eras, new life, and it's commendable, and it definitely honors the tradition of where we've been, while also I think keeping an eye to where we're going.
Hmm.
And so I'm curious, because I think there are a lot of different themes here, said to be, about love, redemption, empowerment, of course, keeping in that rock and roll tradition. Are there any themes, any takeaways that you want the listener to come away with when they listen to these tunes?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned with the Silk Sonic that the sound is sort of retro, but the lyrics thematically sort of bring it into the modern age. And two songs in particular that come to mind when I'm talking about that is definitely Modern Day Dandy. Um, that song I wrote in the middle of the pandemic. It kind of touches on that time period where, there was a lot of social unrest, police brutality. Obviously, our healthcare system was a mess. People, it was a disaster. And so many of us were stuck inside. And so there was like this hopeless feeling of like, I have to post on social media and I have to like show that I'm supporting. And so then all of these big corporations and celebrities sort of jumped on that bandwagon of like, we can't be relatable if we don't do this too. And it's like,
Mhm.
no, you're part of the problem, you know? But that song sounds very fun and glam and dancey. And obviously that's part of like the irony of the lyrics and all that kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, I mean, definitely, like I said, just sort of those modern ideas and putting them to the backdrop of these retro sounds.
Yeah, making it accessible so people then come in and find the deeper meaning, I think is
Yeah.
that's the mark of a good artist. Like there are so many examples, I think, even in the past like 10, 20 years, of artists that have used something cheerful, right? Use like a cheerful soundscape to bring people into a deeper message. Hanson's Mbop was one of those examples where like you listen to the verses and get past the sugary chorus, and like it's actually pretty deep about like, hey, you're only going to have a few like really strong relationships in this life, make sure they last. And that came from, how old were the Hanson brothers when that song came out? Like they were teenagers, if
Yeah.
not younger. You think of a song for like Pumped Up Kicks by Foster the People. It sounds all happy and spacey, but it's about Columbine.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to like soften the blow of these heavy messages, right? By bringing them into something that sounds cheerful on the surface. And I think it's a good microcosm for how we as human beings often mask our pain, right? We mask our
Oh
pain
yeah.
through, putting on a smile and just forging ahead, pushing on through. And, that starts to veer into the realm of toxic positivity sometimes, which fortunately is becoming more of a hot button topic. But like sometimes you have to bring people in that way so they stay there to listen long enough to listen to the message.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, that tradition of it sounding very happy, but the lyrics being really not so much, it kind of, from my understanding, it goes back to Motown.
Hmm.
And it's funny, talking about that, of making it more listenable. Um, like like we sort of talked about, a lot of my stuff is about women empowerment. And I think what women are taught to do a lot of the time is just suck it up and not address their own pain for the sake of other people. And so, obviously I don't think that should be happening. But yeah, I mean, that's obviously I'm doing it on this record. I don't want it. It's such a fun, dancey, like funky track, and it's about my mental health struggles. But I think it's just that's very relatable. I think we all do it in some capacity.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there's, for the longest time been this societal expectation that we're just going to suck it up and keep going, right? I feel like really just over the past decade, it has been where mental health has, been taken at least somewhat more seriously in society. I mean, we obviously still have a lot of work to do because there's still a stigma, and there's still a lot of people out there afraid to express themselves and afraid to express their struggles in an open way, right?
Mhm.
But I feel like, even if we have to bring them in with something that sounds happy, like, it's one way to do it. It's one way to open up that conversation. It's one way to uh, make it more acceptable, quote unquote, to talk about, and try to reduce that stigma, which, we all have work to do. But the important thing is that I think the work is getting done, and that we're realizing that we all have a right to own our stories. We all have a right to own and address our struggles, and
Mhm.
communicate those struggles. And I mean, in my opinion, that's what's going to make us stronger, as a collective, is like, hey, you're struggling with this. I'm struggling with this too, to realize the humanity in each other, regardless of background, circumstance, gender, race, sexual orientation. Like, we all have these struggles that we deal with as human beings on planet Earth, on this spinning blue rock. And the more ways we can find to communicate, the better. And the more open that we can be over time, I think, the better society will be. But that's my TED talk on that topic. I could go all day on that.
Yeah.
But I, really, really enjoy this project classic that you've put out here. And I'm curious to know, within the creative process, within this process of deeper self-discovery as an artist, if you have any favorite moments that you'd like to share with us, in the making of this record.
Yeah. So, I mean, I made this record with Plaid Dog Studios in Boston, and they have a very cool and unique business model where they help small artists crowdfund their first release. And so they basically work with you to create a single on good faith, to use that to create a crowdfunding campaign and get people in, kind of give them a little bit of a taste of what they're supporting.
Mhm.
And then when you reach your goal, you go in and you get to work with a producer and studio musicians and things like that. So I ended up working with them to do this, but my campaign launched March of 2020. Yeah, so it's been a long time coming. But I was able to reach that goal, but unfortunately I wasn't able to go to Boston, which is where it's located. I don't know if I
Right.
mentioned that. So pretty much everything on the record was studio musicians, obviously, except for my vocals, and I had to go in person for that. But I was, sort of on Zoom in the room with them, listening and giving as much input as I can from, behind a screen. But on a funnier, lighter note, those sessions would be really long, and I'd be in this tiny little apartment, and I don't really have any room for like a standing desk. So I have an air fryer and I would use that as my standing desk. And yeah, so that was always very entertaining. I'm like, this is just so telling of the time we live in, where I'm like, I have to be remote. I'm stuck in my apartment. I'm using a laptop on top of an air fryer, like, just, ridiculous, but
Yeah, it made
there it
us
is.
it made us so much more resourceful in a way, didn't it? Because it's like, well,
Yeah.
this is what I've got for the next however long. I better make it work. And
Yeah.
being by yourself in an apartment, is, I'm sure presented its own unique challenges. I was fortunate to have roommates at the time, so like not having to go it alone. But it was just a time, it was so interesting. March 2020, April, May, like just trying to find those funny moments, those silver linings, those things that like, well, at least I'm being resourceful. At least I'm working with what I've got here, because we really didn't know when or if things were ever going to return to some semblance of, what life was before, right? Like there were so many
Mhm.
questions around this pandemic and what it was and what it was going to do to us, especially, the round the clock news cycle, of course, contributing to that and everything. So yeah, it's amazing to see the ways that we had to just like do what we could, to get through it, and just
Literally.
find the humor in whatever we could at the time. And well, it seems like, despite it all, you've come out of it pretty well, and you have this amazing new EP out, classic out now, of course, on your streaming platforms. And with that, now we look to the future. So what are your plans for the rest of 2022 into 23? Any shows coming up? Are you going to be working on a follow-up?
Oh yeah. So I mean, me and the Star Child Band, we gig around New York City all the time with our cover show, and then we have some original music shows coming up at Arlene's Grocery and the Delancey, all those Lower East Side venues. But something we've talked about a lot is, we're relatively, obviously, like this, I've been a solo artist for a very long time, but as a band, we're relatively new. And we've really just like clicked right away, and it's been amazing. But that being said, I wrote all these songs by myself, and so we were all saying like we're so excited to be able to write together. The fact that we just click when we're playing, like we're like, I cannot wait to use that when we write together.
Mhm.
So
And I'm sure you're seeing already, like through the live shows and the experience of playing together, like all these different ideas starting to make their way in, right? The
exactly.
live experience. And of course, it's going to translate into the studio, and the next project will have more influences, more, more things in the pot. And I'm really excited for you to see where it goes.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, Madame Daley joining us here on the Quinn Spin. Before I do my sign-off stuff, I want to give you a chance. First of all, thank you for joining us. Lovely to
Thank you for
chat.
having me.
Yeah, we'll absolutely be doing this again. I want to give you a chance to let people know where they can learn more about you and support you.
Sure. So you can go on literally any social media platform. We're at Madame Daley, MADAME DALEY. And can you tell I've said that a bunch on the microphone before? Yeah. And www.madamedaley.com, Madame Daley on every single streaming platform there is under the sun. Yeah, classic EP streaming now.
Make sure you check it out. Definitely worth the listen, definitely worth the replay. Madame Daley joining us here on the Quinn Spin. And this has been the Quinn Spin. 2 N's in Quinn, 2 N's in Spin. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor, Stitcher, YouTube, and more. Also, learn more about the show at undergroundmusiccollective.com, our central hub for all things independent music, creativity, community, and more. UMC's on all the socials as well. That's Instagram primarily, but also Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. You can follow the UMC 20 playlist on Spotify, and we'll be getting some tracks from the EP on that in the next few weeks. And NashLive.live. We've got some shows coming up in Nashville. Make sure you check that out. I'm very excited that we're going to be taking over the listening room on October 3rd. That's a Monday night. We've got artists from Nashville. We've got artists from beyond, and that's going to be a really fun one. $10 will get you in. Go to NashLive.live to check out all the shows. We've got plenty more where that came from. Revel 9's All I've Become has been our opening theme song since 2014, as I mentioned at the top of the show, and it's going to take us out just like it brought us in. And I'll see you next time.
Down.